To be precise, Paula, this was a 6-3 decision, six conservative justices, three liberal justices. Is that right?
And it was authored by Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Now, some of her conservative colleagues did also opine concurrences here. We're still reading through those. We have old school, the paper copy. It is very long. We're still getting through the whole opinion. So these are just the top lines, but this is enormous. This is yet another huge win for President Trump from this conservative supermajority. Now, we have been reporting since Trump took office in January that his lawyers were telling me, even though a lot of their policies were getting bogged down in the lower courts, that anything they could get in front of this high court, that they would ultimately win. And they were playing a long game. And this decision right here, this is proof that this long game they've been playing for the past 6 or 7 months, they've won, and they've won big time.
Okay, so here is something that is heating up fast, and most people are not paying enough attention to what is happening right now in Washington, because this could change everything about how we hold presidents accountable. Democrats and legal experts are using the Supreme Court's Trump immunity decision as fresh ammunition to talk impeachment again, and I am not just talking about Trump himself here. They are also targeting the conservative justices they say have broken the court to protect him from any meaningful accountability. This is a two-front war now that is escalating by the day. Impeachment talk against the president and impeachment talk against the justices who gave him what critics call a get-out-of-jail-free card that applies to almost everything he does in office. This is wild, and it is reshaping the entire political landscape in ways that will affect the country for years and possibly decades to come. Let me break down what is happening, because this story connects so many threads that have been developing over the past year into one massive constitutional confrontation that could define this era of American politics. The Supreme Court's Trump versus United States ruling gave presidents sweeping criminal immunity for what they called official acts performed while in office. That means anything a president does as part of his job is now essentially untouchable by criminal prosecution, no matter how questionable or potentially illegal that conduct might appear to prosecutors or the public. Critics say this ruling effectively shields most of Trump's conduct in office and has helped unravel the key criminal cases against him one by one like dominoes falling. And in response, Democrats are openly talking about impeachment again as the only remaining tool to hold anyone accountable for anything that happens in the executive branch. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
All right, Paula, stand by. We'll get back to you as you continue reading this opinion, and we'll see what the final decision is with a lot more specific details. I want to go to Jeff Zeleny. He's over at the White House for us, where they're watching very, very closely, probably more closely than any place else in the country right now, what the U.S. Supreme Court is doing.
There's no question about that, Wolf, and exactly what Paula was saying there. This is about something much broader than birthright citizenship. Yes, that specific issue was the venue to get this to the Supreme Court. That will likely be decided on a different day, but it is just the idea of this power of the executive branch that really is at issue here. It's hard to think of another administration, and I've covered the last 4 or 5 presidents, I guess, that has used their executive authority as much, and it's been challenged by lower courts. Now the Supreme Court is weighing in, and it is giving the executive.
Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has already introduced formal impeachment articles against Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas in a dramatic escalation of the fight over the court's direction. She is citing undisclosed gifts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and political flag displays linked to January 6th and their role in decisions that she says show grave threats to the rule of law and democratic governance. She called the immunity ruling an assault on American democracy and said Congress must act against what she described as authoritarian capture of the court by wealthy donors and partisan interests. Those are incredibly strong words from a sitting member of Congress about sitting Supreme Court justices, and she is not backing down from them despite criticism from Republicans. And it is not just the justices in the crosshairs right now, because Trump himself remains a target of impeachment efforts. Inside the House, Trump-focused impeachment resolutions from earlier in 2025 are being brought back up by their authors as proof that Congress still has a constitutional path to hold him accountable, where criminal law now cannot reach him. Representative Sri Thanadar's multi-article impeachment resolution accuses Trump of driving the country toward authoritarianism, attacking judges who rule against him, and condoning defiance of court orders by his administration officials. His allies say these arguments have only gained force now that the Supreme Court has made criminal prosecution nearly impossible for official conduct. Think about what this means for a second and let it really sink in, because the implications are staggering. The highest court in the land has ruled that presidents have sweeping immunity for official acts that covers almost everything they do. That ruling helped collapse the federal election interference cases against Trump that were supposed to hold him accountable for January 6th and the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. It is now being used to challenge his Manhattan conviction on the grounds that some evidence came from official acts. And the response from Democrats is to say, okay, if the criminal justice system cannot hold him accountable, then we have to use the political tools the Constitution gives us instead. Impeachment is back on the table in a serious way that nobody expected a year ago. Can you believe this? We went from criminal indictments that were supposed to hold Trump accountable and possibly send him to prison to a Supreme Court ruling that shields most of his conduct to Democrats, now saying impeachment is the only option left for accountability. The whole landscape of presidential accountability has shifted in ways that nobody predicted, and that will affect every future president regardless of party. Chief Justice John Roberts earlier this year rebuked Trump for calling for judges to be impeached when they ruled against him on various immigration and policy cases. Roberts said those calls were inappropriate and undermined the independence of the judiciary that is essential to our constitutional system. But now Democrats are flipping that argument around completely in a way that highlights the contradictions in the current situation. They are saying it is not the lower court judges who should face consequences for doing their jobs. It is the Supreme Court majority that should be held accountable for enabling near-total presidential immunity that puts the president above the law. Are you kidding me? Democrats are floating impeachment against both Trump and the justices who protected him at the same time in a coordinated constitutional offensive. Whether you think this is overdue accountability for serious misconduct or partisan escalation that threatens institutional stability, it is undeniably one of the most significant constitutional fights we have seen in modern American politics, and everyone should be paying attention. All right, so let us really dig into what is happening here, because I think most people heard about the immunity ruling when it came down last year and assumed it was just another legal development that would get sorted out in the courts eventually, like everything else in our system. But that ruling has fundamentally changed the balance of power between the presidency and every other institution in American government in ways that legal scholars are still trying to fully understand. And now Democrats are arguing that impeachment, which most people thought was politically dead after Trump's previous 2 trials ended in acquittal, is actually the only remaining check on presidential power that still functions in any meaningful way. Let me walk you through exactly what the Supreme Court decided and why it matters so much for everything happening right now in American politics and governance. In Trump versus United States, decided on July 1st, 2024, in a 6-3 ruling along ideological lines, the court held that a president has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for what they called core constitutional acts. Things like pardons and commanding the military and conducting foreign relations and other powers, given specifically to the president by the Constitution itself. Those cannot be prosecuted no matter what the president does with them, ever, under any circumstances, regardless of how corrupt or self-serving the motives behind using those powers might be. But the court went further than that in ways that surprised many legal observers and alarmed critics of expanded executive power. They also said presidents have presumptive immunity for other official acts, meaning anything a president does as part of the job gets the benefit of the doubt automatically without prosecutors having to prove anything. Prosecutors have to overcome a presumption that the conduct is protected before they can even bring charges against a current or former president. Only purely personal, unofficial conduct, stuff that has nothing to do with being president like private business dealings, can be prosecuted without immunity getting in the way and blocking the case from moving forward. The practical effect of this ruling has been devastating for every criminal case against Trump across multiple jurisdictions and legal theories. The federal election interference case, the one where special counsel Jack Smith charged Trump with conspiring to overturn the 2020 election through fake electors and pressure on the vice president. That case was dismissed after the immunity ruling made it nearly impossible to proceed with the charges as originally structured. The Georgia case brought by District Attorney Fani Willis was dismissed too after facing similar legal obstacles created by the immunity framework. The Manhattan conviction, where Trump was actually found guilty by a jury, is now being challenged on immunity grounds, with appeals courts considering whether evidence from official acts tainted the verdict. Across the board, criminal accountability for Trump has collapsed in ways that seemed impossible just 2 years ago. Legal analysts say this ruling effectively shifted accountability from criminal courts to political tools like impeachment as the primary method of checking presidential misconduct going forward. If you cannot prosecute a president for crimes committed in office using official powers, then the only remaining remedy is for Congress to remove him through the impeachment process that the founders included in the Constitution. The Constitution gives Congress that power specifically because the founders understood that presidents might abuse their authority in ways that require a political response rather than a legal one, since they worried about executive tyranny. And that is exactly the argument Democrats are making now with increasing urgency as Trump pushes aggressive policies on immigration and other fronts. Representative Ocasio-Cortez has been the most aggressive voice on this, introducing formal impeachment articles against Justices Alito and Thomas that accuse them of corruption and partisan conduct. She is arguing that these justices have engaged in corrupt partisan behavior that put Trump above the law and undermined the entire constitutional system of accountability. The specific charges cite undisclosed gifts that Alito and Thomas received from wealthy donors over many years, including luxury vacations and private jet travel and real estate transactions. They cite political flag displays at Alito's home that were linked to January 6th and the Stop the Steal movement that sought to overturn the election. And they cite the justices' role in the immunity decision itself as evidence of corruption and partisan motivation. Ocasio-Cortez called the immunity ruling an assault on American democracy that requires immediate congressional action to address before more damage is done to our system of government. She said impeachment should be used the way it was designed by the founders, as a tool to discipline officials, including justices who abuse their power and betray the public trust. Her argument is that the court has been captured by authoritarian interests and wealthy donors, and Congress cannot just sit back and let that continue without some kind of meaningful response that shows the American people that someone is fighting back. Now, will these impeachment articles against justices actually go anywhere in the current political environment where Republicans control the House? Almost certainly not in the current Congress, where Republicans protect their judicial allies and refuse to investigate any misconduct by conservative justices. But that is not really the point of introducing them right now. The point is to make a statement about what Democrats consider unacceptable conduct by the court and put it on the record. The point is to build a public record and shape public opinion about what is happening to our judiciary. The point is to signal that if Democrats ever get unified control of government again, holding justices accountable for corruption and partisan conduct is on the agenda. The Trump-focused impeachment efforts follow the same logic of building pressure even without immediate results in the current Congress. Representative Thanadar's multi-article resolution from earlier this year accuses Trump of obstruction of justice and usurping congressional authority over spending and abuse of power and attacks on the First Amendment and bribery and corruption involving his business interests. When he introduced those articles, some people dismissed them as political theater because impeachment has no chance of succeeding in a Republican House that protects Trump. But Thanadar and his allies are now arguing that the immunity ruling makes their case even stronger than before and more urgent. They say Trump is driving the country toward authoritarianism, attacking judges who rule against him and calling for their impeachment, and condoning defiance of court orders by his administration officials who ignore judicial rulings. The immunity ruling means criminal prosecution cannot address these concerns no matter how serious they are. So impeachment is the only option left according to their argument, and Democrats have a constitutional duty to pursue it. Constitutional law scholars have been weighing in on this debate with varying perspectives about what it means for the future of American government and the separation of powers. Some say the immunity ruling was correct, that presidents need protection from politically motivated prosecutions so they can act boldly in office without fear of being criminally charged by their successors. Others say the ruling creates an imperial presidency with no meaningful checks on power that the founders would have found horrifying. But almost everyone agrees that the ruling has shifted the accountability landscape dramatically in ways we are still understanding and will be dealing with for decades. Think tanks like Brookings and the Constitutional Accountability Center have published detailed analyses arguing that the immunity decision makes impeachment more important than ever as a constitutional tool for checking presidential misconduct and abuse of power. If criminal law cannot reach official presidential conduct, then Congress must be willing to use its impeachment power when presidents abuse their authority. Otherwise, there is no check at all on what a president can do while in office, and we have effectively created an elected king. The irony of the current situation is that Chief Justice Roberts earlier this year publicly rebuked Trump for calling for judges to be impeached when they ruled against his policies on immigration and other matters. Roberts said it was inappropriate for a president to threaten judicial independence that way, and that judges must be free to rule without fear of retaliation. But Democrats are now turning that argument around completely. They are saying the Supreme Court majority, including justices like Alito and Thomas who have received lavish gifts from wealthy donors, should face accountability for decisions that critics say placed Trump above the law and destroyed presidential accountability. Okay, so let us break this down into what it actually means and what we should be watching as this impeachment talk develops over the coming months heading into the 2026 midterms. Because this is not just political theater designed to generate headlines, this is about fundamental questions of who holds power accountable in the American system when the normal checks have been weakened or eliminated by judicial decisions. Point number 1. The Supreme Court immunity ruling has effectively shifted accountability from criminal courts to political tools like impeachment as the primary mechanism for checking presidents who abuse their power. Before this ruling, the assumption was that presidents could be prosecuted for crimes after leaving office just like anyone else in America who breaks the law. Richard Nixon resigned partly because he faced criminal liability and knew prosecution was coming if he stayed. Gerald Ford had to pardon him specifically to prevent that prosecution from happening. The threat of prosecution was supposed to deter future presidents from abusing their power because they knew they could face prison time. That assumption has been completely shattered by Trump versus United States. Presidents now have sweeping immunity for official acts that makes criminal prosecution extremely difficult, if not impossible, in most cases involving conduct in office. The federal cases against Trump collapsed one after another as courts applied the immunity framework. State cases are being challenged on immunity grounds with uncertain outcomes. The criminal justice system has proven unable to hold a president accountable for conduct in office, no matter how serious that conduct might be. That leaves impeachment as one of the only remaining tools for accountability when presidents abuse their power. The Constitution gives Congress the power to remove presidents and other officials, including judges, for high crimes and misdemeanors. This is a political process, not a legal one with different standards and procedures. You do not need to prove crimes beyond a reasonable doubt like in a criminal trial. You need to convince a majority of the House to impeach and 2/3 of the Senate to convict and remove. That has always been a high bar, but it is now the primary bar for presidential accountability since criminal prosecution has been largely eliminated. Point number 2. Democrats are pursuing a two-front strategy targeting both Trump and the conservative justices, who they say enabled him to escape criminal accountability through their immunity ruling. The impeachment articles against Justices Alito and Thomas represent an attempt to hold the court accountable for decisions that critics consider corrupt and partisan rather than principled legal reasoning. The charges focus on undisclosed gifts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and political behavior suggesting bias and the justices' role in the immunity ruling itself. Separately, the Trump-focused impeachment resolutions from earlier this year are being revived as relevant given the immunity decision that changed everything. Thanadar's 7 articles accuse Trump of multiple forms of abuse of power that his allies say have only become more serious, as Trump has pushed extreme policies, knowing criminal prosecution is off the table for official acts no matter what he does. This two-front approach is strategic, even if neither effort succeeds in the current Congress where Republicans hold the House. Even if both efforts fail, and they almost certainly will fail in the current Congress, they accomplish several important goals for Democrats. They build a public record of alleged misconduct that historians will examine. They shape media coverage and public opinion about what is happening. They signal to Democratic voters that their representatives are fighting back against what they see as authoritarianism. And they establish markers for future action if Democrats regain unified control of government in 2026 or beyond. Point number 3. Impeachment is now positioned as the last remaining check on presidential power, which raises the stakes dramatically for whether Congress is willing to use it when the situation demands. Constitutional scholars have long debated when impeachment is appropriate and what standards should apply. Some argue it should be reserved for only the most extreme cases of clear criminality or betrayal. Others argue it should be used more freely as a tool of political accountability whenever a president abuses power. The immunity ruling has sharpened this debate dramatically by eliminating other options. If criminal prosecution cannot reach official presidential conduct, no matter how abusive, and courts cannot effectively restrain a president who ignores their orders, then impeachment becomes the only meaningful check on power that remains. But impeachment requires political will that has been absent in recent years due to partisan polarization. Trump was impeached twice by the House, but acquitted both times by the Senate along party lines. The lesson many drew was that impeachment does not work when partisan loyalty overrides institutional concerns about misconduct. Democrats are now arguing that lesson is wrong and misunderstands what impeachment accomplishes. They say impeachment works exactly as designed. It forces a public reckoning even if removal does not happen at the end. It puts conduct on the record for history. It makes senators and representatives go on the record defending or opposing that conduct, and it shapes how history judges both the accused and those who voted to protect them from accountability. Point number 4. The 2026 midterms will determine whether this impeachment talk has any chance of becoming real action that affects Trump and possibly the justices who protected him. Democrats cannot pass impeachment articles with a Republican House majority that protects Trump. They cannot convict in the Senate without bipartisan support that does not exist right now due to partisan polarization. Everything they are doing now is positioning for a future where they might have more power and can actually follow through. If Democrats win back the House in 2026, impeachment becomes a real possibility that could consume the final years of Trump's term. Articles could be passed and sent to the Senate for trial. Even if conviction fails, the process itself would consume enormous political attention and force difficult votes that could affect future elections. If Democrats also gain Senate seats, the dynamics shift further in their direction. This means voters in 2026 will effectively be voting on whether impeachment should move forward against Trump and possibly the justices. Democrats are making that case now, arguing that Trump and the justices who protect him represent a threat to democracy that requires a political response. Republicans will make the opposite case, arguing that impeachment talk is partisan overreach that destabilizes American institutions and should be rejected. So, where does this go from here, and what should we be watching in the coming months? Watch for more impeachment rhetoric as we get closer to the midterms. Democrats will keep connecting Trump's current actions to the immunity ruling and arguing that only political accountability can check his power now. Watch for legal challenges to the immunity ruling working through the courts. Some scholars believe the decision was wrongly decided and hope future cases will narrow its scope significantly. Watch for developments in the Manhattan case that is testing whether Trump's existing conviction can survive immunity challenges. If that conviction gets reversed, it will validate the argument that the immunity ruling changed everything retroactively. And watch for how Trump himself behaves, knowing that criminal prosecution is largely off the table for official acts. His aggressive moves on immigration and foreign policy, all of that is happening in an environment where he knows the criminal justice system cannot easily reach him. Stay tuned, because this constitutional battle over presidential power is far from over, and the outcome will shape American democracy for generations to come.